Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Yu Hao was finally starting to relax as he flew away. Suddenly, an indescribably frightening sense of danger gradually rose from behind him. A forceful and bold voice filled with seething rage seemed to echo from every corner of the evil demon forest. Who killed my son? Who was it? This voice was purely projected as thought via spiritual power, and both humans and soul beasts could clearly feel the indignation, along with the voice's unrivaled and terrifying spiritual power. More than a third of the evil demon forest began to twist and contort, although the plants weren't hurt or damaged. Countless soul beasts clutched their heads in agony in this moment, and crumpled to the ground. Yu Hao's body slowed conspicuously, and his heart filled with fear. Yu Hao hadn't thought too much when he heard the Evil Eye Tyrant claim that its father would take revenge for it, and had believed that the Evil Eye Tyrant was just trying to threaten him. A defeated 100,000-year soul beast calling for its father, that was simply too laughable. However, after he had calmed down from the fight, and with that furious howl, he suddenly realized something. There could be someone in the evil demon forest who could be 100,000-year soul beast's father, who could have been this Evil Eye Tyrant's father. With that entity's age and cultivation rank, didn't it fit the bill? Yu Hao was actually very lucky. In terms of obtaining soul rings, no other soul beast was more suitable for him than the one he had just used all his strength to kill. However, his luck was so good that it was unbelievable. The soul beast he had just killed was the youngest son of the evil demon forest's true dictator, the Sun Moon Empire's #1 savage beast, and the entire continent's #2 savage beast, the Evil Eye Tyrant King, who was also known as the Evil Emperor. Even though Yu Hao had intercepted that 100,000-year Evil Eye Tyrant's spiritual origin, the Evil Emperor's terrifying spiritual power allowed him to maintain spiritual connections with every single one of its children. The Evil Eye Tyrant's spiritual origin was naturally obliterated after Yu Hao killed it, and even though the Evil Emperor was in a deep slumber, how could it not be startled awake when one of its children's auras suddenly vanished? It was the reason the Evil Emperor had exclaimed so furiously. Yu Hao's scalp began to go numb, and his hair started bristling when he guessed who that horrifying voice belonged to. He didn't dare to hold back anymore, and activated everything he had as he flew forward with all his might. At this moment, many soul beasts were frightened by the evil emperor's ferocious roar, and few soul beasts came forward to intercept him. Yu Hao's heart was a little twisted. He didn't know why his luck in recent days was so terrible. Even after Chio's auspicious sacrifice, this fact didn't change. However, now was obviously not the time for complaints and resentment. Yu Hao continued flying with every ounce of his strength, as he unleashed all of his spiritual power. He activated imitation and spiritual interference to their highest possible levels to mask himself. His fervent hope was that the evil emperor's awakening required a process, and that it couldn't lock onto him as soon as it woke up. What happened proved that his thoughts were wonderful, but reality was cruel. An enormous red pillar surged into the sky in the deepest regions of the evil demon forest. That red pillar was more than 100 meters in diameter, and even people outside the evil demon forest could see it clearly. The pillar surged several thousand meters into the sky, and the clouds swiftly gathered towards it. The enormous pillar broke through the clouds and tainted everything around it a blood-red color. The clouds gradually dispersed, revealing a colossal blood-red eye. This blood-red eye hung thousands of meters in the sky as it looked down on the evil demon forest, and the forceful voice from before rang out once more. "Child, my child, where are you?" This exclamation contained exceptionally strange and sinister spiritual undulations. These undulations descended onto the forest from thousands of meters up in the sky and expanded outward, with the evil demon forest's core region as the epicenter. The spiritual undulations covered an ever larger area of effect, almost 2/3 of the entire evil demon forest. Yu Hao was running away with incredible speed, but he was still far from escaping its area of effect. When those strange spiritual undulations landed on his body, he felt the soul ring storage tool hidden on his body warm up. Shit! Hu Yuhao immediately understood that he was in trouble. The Evil Eye Tyrant King couldn't instantly find the location where his son had died, but he was using this exclamation charged with spiritual undulations to find the 100,000-year Evil Eye Tyrant's spiritual undulations. Hu Yuhao had purified that Evil Eye Tyrant's spirit, but the soul ring that it had left behind still contained some of its spiritual undulations. Hu Yuhao almost didn't have any time to plan, or to think of anything, as the eye of destiny between his eyebrows lit up. The wheel of light behind his head that had formed when he faced off against the 100,000-year Evil Eye Tyrant glimmered once more. In the next moment, the colossal blood-red eye in the sky seemed to refract as a blood-red pillar 100 meters across refracted downwards from several thousand meters in the sky. Things like the sun-moon divine needle were just a small toy compared to this horrifying red pillar of light. Boom, boom, boom. Somewhere in the evil demon forest, or rather at Hu Yuhao's location, a humongous mushroom cloud surged into the sky. Anybody looking down from the sky could see that a region of the spacious evil demon forest had been washed entirely blood-red. Afterwards, the lush green in that region melted away just like that. This region was at least 1,000 meters in diameter, and not a single inch of vegetation remained. The red colors in the sky gradually faded away, and the blood-red light receded and fell back into the evil demon forest's core regions. A dense and grievous will traveled out from that place as powerful emotional ripples blanketed the entire forest, and countless soul beasts cried out and teared up as a result. The area that was just bombarded by that terrifying red light began to lose all those red hues, and not a single soul beast would dare to enter that region for a month. The forest wasn't the only thing obliterated by that horrifying spiritual power. The earth had sunk down by several dozen meters, as if the very stones and soil had been stripped of life. However, in the middle of this region that was temporarily considered forbidden ground, a wave of intense coughing sounds could be heard. A battered and wretched figure slowly stood up. His entire body was covered with a layer of dirt, and his appearance was completely obscured, while his clothes were conspicuously torn and tattered, but he was alive. He sighed at his own luck. "I'm still alive." Hu Yuhao's face twitched as intense dizziness struck his head. He had formidable spiritual power, but he currently felt as if his entire spiritual sea had been sucked dry. His body was soft and weak, and he struggled to even continue standing up straight. His entire body was in a bad state. Yes, he was still alive after taking a hit from the evil emperor, who had 800,000 years of cultivation. How unimaginable was this? The evil emperor, who had just unleashed that attack, had no reason to expect that this human was still alive. When he had discovered Hu Yuhao with his spiritual detection, he could already tell how strong he was. From the evil emperor's perspective, this attack was enough to obliterate Hu Yuhao from the face of the earth. The evil emperor's arrogance meant he couldn't be bothered to check the aftermath. Furthermore, he was in the most crucial time of his closed-door cultivation, so he didn't have the time and energy to investigate. The Skydream Iceworm's hopeful words from back then clearly didn't come true. The evil emperor wasn't far from the limit, but he wasn't there, after all, and he was still alive. He was the continent's second strongest savage beast as long as he was still alive, and one of the most frightening existences on the continent. It feels great to be alive. Hu Yuhao heaved a sigh inside. You've saved me yet again, Chioa. The reason why he was still alive naturally wasn't because he had enough strength to withstand that all-out attack from the Evil Eye Tyrant King. How could the evil emperor's spiritual sweep have any judgmental errors? The reason why he was alive was because of the skull bone that he had obtained from Wang Chioa, the auspicious beast's skull bone. The auspicious beast's skull bone possessed a special ability, besides bestowing two powerful soul skills upon Hu Yuhao. This ability was called spiritual immunity. Hu Yuhao could make himself immune to all kinds and levels of spiritual attacks 3 times a day. Unless Hu Yuhao was faced with a god who had the ability to change destiny, Hu Yuhao could render himself immune to all sorts and levels of spiritual attacks. Hu Yuhao had relied on this ability, which was basically against natural law in the spiritual realm, to challenge the 100,000-year Evil Eye Tyrant. He had used this ability to gain the advantage against his adversary in a perilous battle, and had eventually managed to kill it. Hui Yuhao could use spiritual immunity 3 times, when he was in peak condition. After using this ability once, he would have to replenish his skull bone with spiritual power through his own cultivation. Of course, he could use another method to replenish his skull bone. He could consume other skull bones, just like how he had consumed the 100,000-year Evil Eye Tyrant's skull bone. Hui Yuhao would need at least a month to fully replenish his skull bone to 3 instances of spiritual immunity, if he didn't consume any skull bones. Spiritual immunity didn't seem like much when one considered that 1 month was a very long time. But in reality, this ability was very useful to Hui Yuhao. Hui Yuhao had had to use spiritual immunity to defend himself against a spiritual type attack at his level of spiritual power. So just how powerful did that attack have to be? Everything that had just happened proved this point. No matter how powerful the evil emperor was, spiritual immunity had still protected Hui Yuhao from its attack. However, Hui Yuhao also had sufficient experience through this attack that not everything was absolute. The evil emperor's attack didn't kill him, but his spiritual sea was immediately sucked dry in that instant, and even his skull bone was sucked dry. Hui Yuhao felt very fortunate that his auspicious beast's skull bone had consumed the Evil Eye Tyrant's skull bone before this. The spiritual power from consuming that skull bone was currently replenishing him slowly. Otherwise, he would have fainted, and he had no idea how long it would have taken him to wake up if that happened. I have to leave this place as quickly as possible. I must. Otherwise, if the evil emperor dusts its hands and comes down to take a look, I'm dead. Hui Yuhao would have trouble fighting even a single 1,000-year soul beast in his current state, let alone the strongest individual among all the Evil Eye Tyrants. Hui Yuhao bit down on the tip of his tongue. An intense pain reinvigorated his spirit and pumped adrenaline into his system. He quickly checked his soul ring storage tool. That thing was worthy of being a Class 8 soul tool, and wasn't destroyed while under the protection of Hui Yuhao's spiritual immunity. The 100,000-year soul ring that was contained inside was also intact. At least he didn't take that attack for nothing. Hui Yuhao retrieved a small bracelet from his storage ring and put it on his wrist. Afterwards, he began to activate this bracelet with his soul power. He had consumed too much spiritual power, but his soul power's situation was relatively good. The silver bracelet swiftly shone, with a layer of gentle silver light, as Hui Yuhao infused soul power into it, and this silver light wrapped backwards and stretched up along his wrist. The silver light quickly formed a silver bracer cocooning his left arm. Rows of silver light shone from his bracer, and ray after ray of silver light flickered as metal pieces covered by that silver light hovered in front of Hui Yuhao. Hui Yuhao took a deep breath and released his soul power to produce vigorous kinetic forces, and attached those rays of silver light to his body. The silver lights rapidly covered his body, and it didn't take long before his entire body was covered by a human-shaped soul tool. This human-shaped soul tool was a lot prettier and more elegant than the one that he had crafted in the tournament not too long ago. This set was streamlined all over, and very simplistic and generous. A pair of wings arched behind his back, and quickly became 3 layers of golden wings, as he infused soul power into them. Every layer of golden wings had 6 blasting holes, the higher wings narrower than the ones below. Every other part was matched to Hui Yuhao's frame, every component intricately and finely assembled. Hui Yuhao only looked a little bigger after donning this suit, and there were no redundancies at all. This was the human-shaped soul tool that Xian Ziwen had personally crafted for Hui Yuhao. Xian Ziwen had considered that Hui Yuhao was still a soul king back then, and so had done all he could with this soul tool to ensure that it could maintain its strength as a Class 7 soul tool, and that Hui Yuhao could still use it as a soul king. Hui Yuhao didn't have time to wear this suit when he faced off against the Holy Ghost Church's powerful individuals, because everything had happened too suddenly. So this was the first time he had used it. In truth, there wasn't any practical use to wearing this suit against those evil-titled Doluo. However, his situation was very different at the moment. With this soul tool, he could use the 12 miniature compressed sealed milk bottles attached to it to sustain himself for another round of high-intensity combat. With this suit, Hui Yuhao would have no problems protecting his life even if he encountered another 100,000-year soul beast. At the same time, he could use this suit to get out of the forest as quickly as possible. Hu Yuhao didn't fly into the sky, because he was still inside the evil demon forest. He activated the soul thrusters on his back and propelled himself forward at breakneck speed. His goal now was to leave the evil demon forest as quickly as possible, and then find somewhere safe, so that he could absorb his seventh soul ring, the one from that 100,000-year evil eye tyrant, and become a soul sage. Shrek City, the Tang sect. Bam! A dull slap could heard as Bei Bei stood up with a grave and gloomy look on his face. Shu Sansha, He Kai-tu, Yi Gai, Jing Ziyan, and Ji Juechen sat on both sides of the table, along with Xiao Xiao, Jiang Nan, Nana, and Mo Xian. Besides Xian Zuan and Jiao Delu, almost all of the Tang sect's inner circle was here. 3 days. You guys have been back for 3 days, and we still haven't heard anything from our little junior brother. In terms of time, he should have returned before you with his flying-type soul tool, whether he traveled across the ocean or land. But so many days have gone by, and where is he? Who can tell me where he is? Bei Bei's voice became higher, and anger that was seldom seen on him filled his scholarly face. Shu Sansha and the others had successfully returned with the hostages, and came back to the Tang sect a few days ago. However, their elation and joy from successfully accomplishing their mission quickly dampened as they discovered that Hu Yuhao hadn't returned, and they hadn't heard a single thing from him. Bei Bei had received all their reports, and then consoled them before he went to Shrek Academy with a gloomy face. 3 days had gone by, and nobody from either the Tang sect or Shrek Academy had heard anything from or about Hu Yuhao. For the Tang sect, every single hostage added together wasn't as important as Hu Yuhao. This was the same for Shrek Academy, too. What was even more disadvantageous for them was that the Sun Moon Empire had increased their monitoring and surveillance of the Dolua continent's 3 native empires exponentially, as well as on Shrek Academy, which had rescued the hostages, and continued to send army after army towards their borders. The Star Luo Empire and the Heavenly Soul Empire did the same. Their hostages had been saved, and the Sun Moon Empire hadn't recovered their strength. This was the best opportunity for these 2 empires to deal a heavy blow to the Sun Moon Empire, and neither empire was stupid. What were they waiting for, if not for this chance to weaken their enemy? The Doling Empire was positioned behind the other 2 empires, but their survival was closely related to the other 2. The Doling Empire had already deployed a huge army with 7 title Doluor towards their borders, and a great war could break out within a short period of time. Under such circumstances, both Shrek Academy and the Tang sect would have an exceptionally difficult time if they wanted to send someone into the Sun Moon Empire to search for Hu Yuhao. Therefore, they could only choose to wait for now. They had waited for 3 days, and those days had gone by without any news of Hu Yuhao. Starting from the time Shu Sansha and the others had separated from Hu Yuhao, 8 full days had gone by, and the rage that Bei Bei had been suppressing in his heart finally erupted uncontrollably. Bei Bei didn't mention it explicitly, but everyone understood that Hu Yuhao's decision to return to Sunrise City so that he could help Nan Qiuqiu save Nan Shui wasn't a wise one. However, the mission was empathic and righteous. Could they blame Hu Yuhao? No, because everyone else would have done the same if they had been in his shoes. Shu Sansha forced a laugh and said, "If only I had stayed behind then." He Kai-tu said, "How could you have stayed back? Our plans outside required you to transport us over long distances, and who could have taken over for you?" Yu Hao's decision was right. He is adept at concealing himself, and he was the least likely to run into trouble by staying behind amongst all of us. We have to trust him, and trust that no danger will happen to him. Eldest senior brother, don't be too impatient and flustered. Being flustered will accomplish nothing, because we can only continue waiting. The borders have been locked down so tightly, so it's normal that little junior brother is taking a little longer to return. Bei Bei's expression settled down a little, and he returned to his seat. I'm sorry. I haven't been in the right state of mind over the past few days. Actually, I should be the one to blame for this matter. I should have been the one following him. Little junior brother has been through so much hardship recently, and Dorma is still in a deep slumber. I'm really afraid that something's happened to him. If something does happen to him, how do we explain it to Donga after she wakes up? The academy is even more worried than I am, and Elder Xian sends people almost every day to inquire if Yu Hao has returned. Yu Hao is younger than us, but has always been so steady, no matter what he does. He naturally understands that we worry about him, and he will return as quickly as possible if he's all right. The tight surveillance soul tools of all kinds on the borders would spell great trouble for us, but he possesses formidable spiritual power, and he's by himself. I'm sure it won't be difficult for him to hide and make it back discreetly. Therefore, even though I'm not willing to admit this, I can be almost 100% sure that he's run into some kind of trouble. I just don't know whether he's run into a big problem, or a small one. Shu Sanxia said, Sister Xiaodao is in Sunrise City too, and she has regained her mind and her consciousness with Yu Hao's help. She has 8 soul rings, and her element is as close as it gets to ultimate fire. Yu Hao should have a chance to escape with her help even if he's caught by evil soul masters. Let's wait for another 2 days, and if we still have no news about him, we will invite the academy to come out. No matter what, we have to find some way to infiltrate the Sun Moon Empire to search for him. Bei Bei nodded and said, that's all we can do. Boom, boom, boom. A thunderous boom rang out right at this moment. This deafening boom startled the Tang sex members, even though they were inside a conference room. He Kaitao glanced out of the window confusedly and muttered, such loud thunder. Why is the sky getting dark? It was still morning, but everyone could see that the sky outside the conference room's window was darkening at an alarming rate, to the point where the conference room also darkened. Let's take a look outside. Bei Bei got to his feet and swiftly stepped outside, and everyone else followed behind him. Everyone walked out, and their expressions grew solemn. Their judgment from inside the conference room was right. The sky was getting dark, and it was getting dark really quickly. However, there was an abnormal feeling about this phenomenon. If the weather were changing, dark clouds would roll over the skies, winds would blow, and they would gradually appear randomly. The sky would become gloomy and darken as a whole. However, what they could see were neat black colors far beyond the horizon, and this black mass was swiftly spreading towards Shrek City, as if an enormous army were invading them. This scene seemed as if there was a curtain in the sky that was slowly being pulled up, and causing the entire world to go dark. Something is wrong. Kai Tu quickly informed Teacher Xian. Sanxia, you will immediately head to the academy to ask about what's happening. Nan Nan, Xiao Xiao, you two will proceed to the top of the city wall, and relay any information as quickly as possible. Use flying-type soul tools to travel there and back. Quickly gather the Tang sect's other members, and get everyone to prepare for any unforeseen circumstances. Bei Bei seemed especially calm, and swiftly delegated duties to everyone. The Tang sect's members began to move immediately. However, Shu Sanxia had just gotten off his feet, when a dense voice boomed across the entire city. Every disciple from Shrek Academy's inner courtyard, assemble at the southern city wall. This voice was all too familiar to the Tang sect. It came from Elder Xian. A jade-green flare surged into the sky at the same time, exploding high in the sky and transforming into an exclusive avatar of Shrek, as green light permeated the heavens. It was very eye-catching. Many of the people here were from Shrek Academy, and their expressions immediately changed when they saw this firework. This signal didn't just signify danger, it meant that voluminous amounts of enemies were about to invade the city. How could that be? Shrek Academy was located within the Doluo continent's core regions, and the academy had very good relationships with all 3 empires. Where did these enemies come from? Even if it was the body sect attacking them, they wouldn't suddenly launch an invasion against Shrek Academy at a time when the Sun Moon Empire posed a great threat to everyone. Shrek Academy had always been fair to everyone, but they were an academy, after all. They accepted talents and prodigies from all over the world, and they produced similar talents. They weren't like sects, who would only nurture and develop their own strength. For as long as Bei Bei could remember, this was the first time that Shrek Academy had released an emergency signal such as this one. What is happening? Bei Bei could hear that Elder Xian's voice was stable, but there was a thread of anxiety and worry amidst that steadiness. What did the sudden change in the sky bring? What do we do, Bei Bei? Shu Sanxia asked Bei Bei. Everyone's eyes turned towards Bei Bei, and he lowered his voice as he said, "Get on the southern city wall, everyone. Nana, you will remain, and when teacher Xian comes out, kindly ask him to lead our brethren from the Tang sect's soul tool hall to transport the soul tools that we have crafted and stockpiled to the southern city wall. Be quick." Yes, Nana nodded hurriedly. Bei Bei waved his hand and immediately led the Tang sect's members towards the southern city wall. At Shrek Academy's southern city wall. Ever since Shrek City was established, the highest part of the city wall and the strongest and most meticulous defenses across the entire city had always been on the southern side of the city. The reason was simple: this direction was facing the Great Star Doe Forest. Ever since the Great Star Doe Forest's uprising, the southern city wall had been further fortified. The southern city wall was 1,500 feet tall and 200 feet wide. It stretched across more than 5 kilometers, and it could accommodate more than 10,000 people to fight on its walls at the same time. Shrek City's army was more or less connected to Shrek Academy. Shrek City didn't have a lord. The city's defense fell to Shrek Academy's Sea Gods Pavilion. Almost every city defense officer was a powerful individual who had graduated from Shrek Academy. If someone had to choose a city across the continent with the highest concentration of Soul Masters, Shrek City would undoubtedly take the top spot. The Soul Engineers in the Sun Moon Empire's Radiant City could also be called Soul Masters, but Radiant City was densely populated, and their Soul Engineer to Citizen ratio couldn't compare to the density of Soul Masters in Shrek City. Shrek City's current Chief Defense Officer was named Shishing. He was a tall middle-aged man, looking a little more than 40 years old. He had a square and flat face, big eyes, and thick eyebrows. He had a muscular frame, and he gave others a towering and imposing feeling with his mere presence. He was 48 years of age, and could be said to be in the prime of his life. When he was studying at Shrek Academy, he had once had a nickname, the Time Magician. Afterwards, when he became a titled Doluor, his title was Time, the Time Doluor, Shishing. 3 years ago, the previous Chief Defense Officer had resigned and returned to Shrek Academy's inner courtyard to enjoy his retirement, and Shishing had become Shrek City's Chief Defense Officer with a unanimous vote from the Sea Gods Pavilion. He was responsible for everything that had to do with the city's defenses. Their city defense officer was actually a titled Doluor. Possibly only Shrek City could afford to have such a luxurious arrangement. At this moment, the Time Doluor, Shishing, was standing on the city wall and gazing far into the distance with a door look on his face. More accurately, he was staring to the south. The pitch-black sky was spreading from south of the city. At this moment, the black sky's forward progress seemed to slow a little, but the pressure that came from those clouds made everyone feel quite breathless. Shrek City's city defense army was hard at work on the city wall, and everyone was nervously setting up all sorts of defensive soul tools. Shrek City hadn't participated in a war for many years, but the city defense army was very organized and disciplined. The pressure that came from the sky made everyone ghastly pale, but they grit their teeth and continued with whatever they had to do. There were 100,000 people in Shrek City's army, 30% of them were Soul Masters. Most of these Soul Masters had graduated from Shrek Academy's outer courtyard, and they chose to enlist in the city defense army when they failed to enter the inner courtyard, so that they could train for several years more. Shrek City's city defense army had quite a reputation. They had only participated in a little more than 10 wars across their 10,000-year history, but they accomplished feats and miracles that shook the entire continent in every instance. For example, when the Sun-Moon continent clashed with the Doluor continent all those years ago, the Sun-Moon continent started a holy war. The Sun-Moon continent's fighting style, with all their soul tools, was too unique at that time, and they successively defeated the Doluor continent's native empires across many battles. Back then, Shrek Academy had deployed 3,000 men from their city defense army. These men were known as Shrek's army, and they had hurried to the front lines. They only had 3,000 men, but they relied on themselves and the terrain to forcefully barricade the Sun-Moon Empire's great army for 15 days. They gave the Doluor continent's various empires sufficient time to gather their armies, and gave everyone the chance for one last stand. The Doluo continent's native empires emerged victorious in the end. Shrek's army had enjoyed their stellar reputation across the continent from that moment onwards, and it was considered a glorious thing to become part of Shrek City's city defense army. Therefore, if the students from Shrek Academy's outer courtyard couldn't make it into the inner courtyard, they would try everything they could to join Shrek's city defense army to serve for at least 3 years. This experience would become a glorious mark on their resumes, and greatly beneficial for their future development. Shrek City was just a city after all, so it wasn't easy to sustain an army of 100,000 soldiers. It was easier for those soul masters who made up 30% of the army, because they came from the academy, so they didn't receive any special treatment. However, the other 70%, who were just normal soldiers, Shrek City had to pay from its own pockets. Large cannons lined the top of the city wall, pointed far into the distance. All kinds of stationary soul cannon shells were lifted to the top of the city wall, and 3,000 soul masters took but a mere 15 minutes to assemble. Everyone was already on top of the city wall, and they were all preparing for battle in their respective positions. Of the remaining 7,000 soldiers, or auxiliary soldiers to be exact, 3,000 served as one-to-one fallbacks for these soul masters, while the remaining 4,000 soldiers prepared to reinforce their comrades. The southern side of the city was their main defense zone. There was a lot less manpower assigned to the other 3 sides, but the number of defensive soul tools allocated were the same. When necessary, soul masters could rapidly switch positions to the other sides and operate those soul tools. However, Shishing didn't have to worry about the other 3 sides of the city wall for now. Over on Shrek Academy's side, teams of students from the outer courtyard were proceeding toward the city walls on every other side as quickly as they could. Even though they were all younger than 20, they had been through strict and rigorous training, and they had no trouble operating typical soul tools. This was especially true after the Tang sect managed to create sealed milk bottles, so even normal citizens could operate low-tier soul tools, let alone these soul masters, who all had at least 2 soul rings. Shrek Academy's inner courtyard didn't idle around either. Shadow after shadow swiftly proceeded from the eastern side of the city towards the southern city wall. Shishing planted his hands on the battlements and gazed into the distance. He could taste bitterness from the corner of his mouth. How many years has Shrek City not participated in a war, and now it's here? He couldn't remember, but what he could remember was that the previous 2 city defense officers didn't participate in a single war. He had been elected for only 3 years, and he had almost struck the jackpot. No, he truly did strike the jackpot. Traces of their enemies gradually appeared across the horizon. Which force across the entire continent could cause the skies to change, and could stomp towards Shrek City's great army with such fanfare? Only an empire could create a force on such a scale. However, how could the Doluo continent's 3 native empires make a move against Shrek City? If so, what other entities besides empires could do something like this? There was only one other place, and it was a place that was more frightening than any of the 3 native empires. The army from that place wasn't very intelligent, but they possessed impressive fighting instincts. They were born with a taste for blood and an inclination to kill, and they were full of hatred for humans. Almost every single individual in that army was powerful, and there were almost endless numbers of them, while some of the continent's strongest individuals were behind them, holding down the fort. Yes, this frightening power came from Shrek Academy's neighbor. Shrek had encountered them many times in the past, and almost every single member from Shrek Academy had been to this place, the Great Star Doe Forest. The beast tide was here. Masses of soul beasts that dotted the sky until it turned black were gradually bearing down on Shrek City. They weren't moving very quickly, but they were organized and disciplined. The soul beasts fanned forward, moving forward almost in tandem with the dark clouds in the sky. Gentle winds gusted through the air, and the faint smell from these soul beasts gradually traveled to the top of Shrek City's wall. Shishing was a titled Doluo, considered one of the strongest individuals in the world today. However, he stared at the beast wave that was just so tremendous, and he couldn't help but lick his lips as he drew a cold breath. Why were the Great Star Doe Forest's soul beasts going crazy? What happened, exactly, that triggered them to launch an invasion? The Great Star Doe Forest had been very peaceful in recent years, and nobody had heard of anyone killing 100,000-year soul beasts in the forest. The Great Star Doe Forest's core region had developed rapidly over the past few hundred years, and countless powerful individuals had emerged from within. Even Shrek Academy's inner circle wouldn't venture into that place for no good reason, while Shrek City and the Great Star Doe Forest had been enjoying peace for the past centuries. So why were they doing this? Why did the Great Star Doe Forest launch an invasion on such a large scale, and why were they advancing on the city like an army? This couldn't have been instigated by a small group of soul beasts. The army of soul beasts seemed endless, and without those few who resided in the slaughtering grounds mobilizing them, this army of soul beasts wouldn't appear on such a large scale. The beast army's front lines were now less than 10 kilometers away from Shrek City's southern city wall. They maintained their steady forward movement, while the dark clouds above their heads gradually blanketed the sky above them. The closer they came, the more pressure could be felt on the top of the city wall. If Shrek's city defense army hadn't been elite and outstanding, if another normal army was here, they would probably have tucked tail and run away in fear. There was an uncountable number of soul beasts in this army. Right at this moment, shadow after shadow descended from the sky and landed on top of the southern city wall. The leading person was tall, and messy white hair draped behind his head as he stepped towards the battlements with a solemn look on his face. He was Shrek Academy's true number one individual, the master of the Sea Gods Pavilion, Elder Xian. The Sea Gods Pavilion's other elders followed behind Elder Xian. Everyone was on the scene, including the Academy's two deans, Yang Xiaozhe and Xian Lina. The only person who wasn't here was the Sea Gods Pavilion's youngest and weakest member, Hu Yuhao. More than 40 students from Shrek Academy's inner courtyard followed behind the elders from the Sea Gods Pavilion. Shrek Academy's teachers were split evenly into 3 groups, and they proceeded to the city's 3 other walls to command the outer courtyard students, who were stationed there. They were most familiar with those students, and hence the teachers commanding them would be most convenient and suitable. Elder Xian gazed into the distance, and his expression instantly became even blacker than before. He had risen into the sky before this to check out the situation, and only afterwards did he release that emergency signal. At this moment, the Soul Beast army was a lot closer to Shrek City, and Elder Xian was very clear about how dire their situation was. He was the only one who had gone through the previous beast tide among the various elders from the Sea Gods Pavilion. However, the situation that they were facing right now was more perilous than the previous invasion. Elder Xian didn't have any time to contemplate why the Great Star Doe Forest would suddenly launch a beast wave, and why they would come to Shrek City first. The only thought in his mind was if Shrek Academy could defend themselves against an enormous army that consisted of more than 100,000 soul beasts. During the previous beast wave, Shrek City had released a call for help as soon as they could. Elder Mu was the one directing things over in Shrek Academy, and they had the body sect helping them out. Even though the body sect and Shrek Academy weren't on good terms, they had good chemistry and teamwork during that incident. They had managed to hold out until sufficient reinforcements had arrived, and only then did they stop those soul beasts from advancing. Eventually they signed a peace treaty with the savage beasts. However, the soul beasts had gone against their treaty on their own initiative, and had launched a beast wave against Shrek City. Elder Mu was no longer here, and they didn't have the body sect to help them this time. Even though Shrek City had a lot more soul tools right now compared to back then, could they really hold off such a terrifyingly huge army of soul beasts? The Sea Gods Pavilion's several elders also looked very grave as they stared at the army in front of them. Elder Song arrived beside Elder Xian, and he lowered his voice as he said, "Why haven't we seen any omens or warnings, and yet the Great Star Doe Forest launched a beast wave against us? What is happening, exactly?" Elder Xian lowered his voice and said, "There was an omen, don't you remember? Several days ago, a mass of blood clouds appeared above the Great Star Doe Forest. I'm afraid this incident has something to do with that. Can it be that one of the Great Star Doe Forest's important soul beasts, or perhaps a certain savage beast, has been killed by human soul masters, and they are infuriated because of that? The peace treaty that we signed back then stated that we could not attack the savage beasts, and those fellows who direct things inside the Great Star Doe Forest have always been honorable. It seems like something big must have happened. Part 1 end here.